Hey, welcome in. In this video, we're going to be talking about lists, which are a very important kind of class of objects in R. So let's get right into it and clear my console here. We're going to start by defining a list. And the way I like to think of a list is quite simply a collection of different objects. We've already talked about vectors, which are kind of usually a collection of sort of the same type of objects. What's cool with a list is that we can have a bunch of different types of objects together. So for example, I can define a list of, in this case, remember that 1:10 gives me a vector of the numbers 1 to 10 and the number 4. So here I'm going to run this code and get, in my environment, you see I have X, which is a list of 2. And if I look at my output, I have this kind of funky looking output. And we're going to get into what this means in a second. But what's cool is that I have 2 different types of objects here. I have a vector and I have a number, which is really just a vector of 1. So maybe not that interesting, but they're different lengths. And we saw that sometimes things with different lengths can have issues. So that this is pretty cool. So the output here is telling us the basic structure of the list. We've seen this single parentheses before. We know if we want to index into this vector, we would just do, single parenthesis 7 would index into the 7th element, which is 7. This double square bracket basically tells us like what part of the list, I'm actually not sure of the right terminology, what branch of the list we want to go into. So if I do X double bracket 1, that's going to return the first kind of element in the list. In this case, that's a vector, or the vector 1 to 10. And we can actually chain the command. So if I do, if I put in, like I was saying, 7, index 7, that's going to return the 7th element in the first element of the list X. The first element is the vector 1 to 10, and then we can index straight away to get 7. So it's pretty cool. There's a lot of square brackets going on here. We can very quickly access different values in X. And of course, X2 is going to be 4. That's the second element. If I asked for X3, it's going to tell me the subscript is out of bounds because we only have 2 elements in our list. And what's really nice about lists is the different objects in the list don't have to be kind of the same sort of class. Here I have a vector, here I have a single number, which is a vector of length 1 essentially, but here I have a letter. And that's kind of interesting because if I tried to define a vector, like if I tried to define a vector C, 4, 5, and A, the vector is not okay with that. And the vector is going to convert all of these into characters because it sees 1 character here with A. So it's going to convert 1 to a character, 4 to a character. If I tried to like add 8 to this vector, it's going to say that's an error because we're adding a non-numeric argument, which is all of these different characters to 8. So it doesn't work with vectors. But what's nice is if we run this code for X, we're going to see that it works for lists. We can preserve the fact that these are numbers. So we have our vector in our first element, our vector in our second element, and a letter or a character in our third element. And again, we can just index right into that if we want to. So that's really neat about lists. And this is a very simple example. We have a simple vector, a simple number, a simple letter, but these different elements can be super, super complicated. You can have all types of objects as lists here, data frames, letters, model outputs, huge matrices, big vectors. A lot of times the complicated functions to run will output lists because it's such a nice way to kind of organize things. So very useful for organizing things that aren't the same sort of type. We can kind of dive a little bit more into like the specifics of working with a list. One nice tool that I like to, one nice command is unlist, which as the name implies, basically undoes a list. If I enter X, it's going to kind of combine everything in the list into a vector. So it just takes the first element, the second element, and the third element, and just combines it into a vector. Because as we mentioned, as we saw, if a vector has, different, like some numerics and some characters, it's going to force everything to a character, but it's nice in case you want to just like undo the list and kind of reverse, that process. Another nice kind of feature of a list is that if you want to add something to the list, you can use C, which says concatenate C, X, and let's say we want to add the number 8, and it will automatically add an entry 8 as the 4th entry. So that's a really cool way just to tack on to a list if you want to. So that's all for lists. These can be a little bit intimidating, so it's good to sort of get the basics because they are very useful and very powerful object in R. So we'll see you next time.